Bonjour, je suis le professeur. Préparez-vous à la douleur.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. I'm Professor Victor and I'll be your host as we're going through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and important modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I highly recommend you check out our introduction video. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. But in short, what we do here is we take a particular subgenre of horror and we look at 3 representative examples of that subgenre. Today, the subgenre we're looking at is the new French Extremity, and this is one of my favorite subgenres, or at least it's become one of my favorite subgenres over the last 20 years or so. The new French Extremity, if you're not familiar with it, is a movement that started with a bunch of directors in France around the turn of the century, so around 1999, 2000. And there was a bunch of directors that were making movies that were really transgressive and tied political commentary and sex and violence into something really, really shocking and confrontational, something really in your face. It was eye-catching and noteworthy and really extreme. And it was something that really kind of caught fire around the time. It was a wave of these movies that came out that really shocked people. The contents of the movies were so violent and graphic and gory, tying all kinds of other horror subgenres like body horror and splatter and things like that into something a little bit more. Well, the word I'll use because it gets used a lot when people talk about the new French Extremity is transgressive, and that's the word I'll use. It feels violative. It feels almost kind of wrong to watch it. It's really not for the squeamish. If you're new to horror, this probably isn't the place that you would want to start your horror education. This would be kind of the advanced level of horror for people. But it's definitely something that I wanted to talk about. Because it was an important movement that technically I think is still going on, although it really doesn't seem to have a lot of cachet or buzz about it at this point in time. But also B, because I really like it, and I don't know if that says something about me, but I find the new French Extremity to be really, really interesting. More so than your average splatter gore fest. And the reason why I think is because by and large, I think the movies have something to say. Whether or not they're successful in saying it is a matter of debate. But I think that the movies are attempting to be something a little bit more highbrow than the average splatter gore fest that we would maybe see in, which we've talked about in our splatter video, and are a lot of fun. These movies are less fun, more shocking. So with that, let's go ahead and get into it. We've arranged the movies in an order of undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate, like we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. And in this case, they're going to be in the order of how much I like them. So with the postgraduate being the movie that I like the most out of the 3. So with that, buckle up, kids, because we're going to go for a ride. The first movie that we're going to look at today, the undergraduate level movie, is Frontiers. Now, Frontiers, which came out in 2007 and probably should be pronounced with a French accent, but that's probably, frankly, a bad idea for me to do, is set against a backdrop of a new right-wing candidate for president of France being nominated, while a group of Muslim Arabs run afoul of a group of neo-Nazis. It does not go well. The movie is notorious for being exceptionally violent, which it is. And I really like this movie, but it's not really a favorite of mine. And I think the reason why is I feel like I don't connect with it as much, or it doesn't hit as well for me And it might be because, frankly, I just like the other movies we're about to talk about on this video a little bit more. And I saw this movie after I saw those. But it really does deserve its reputation as being a tough watch. It's extremely violent, and, it's got this white supremacy angle to it that will frankly hit rather close to home even today, especially today, I guess you could say. So there's an intertwining of the politics and the violence in the movie that really feels more meaningful than something like, say, Dead Alive, which is a lot more campy and fun gore and violence. The violence in Frontiers is more extreme and more realistic and hits a little bit harder because it's a commentary on a political situation and not just a fun gore fest. And there's a debate to be had whether or not that's a good or a bad thing. The movie comes off as a little bit more important or heavy as a result of the intertwining of politics and violence, but it also maybe is a little less fun. That's perhaps part of the problem people have with the new French Extremity in general, and maybe this movie in particular. It may be what kind of undercuts my enjoyment of it is that the politics are kind of front and center in the movie. And I'll be honest, I don't really know that much about French politics, so I don't know enough about what it means when they're talking about the president being elected and things like that. So it may have another layer or another level of depth to it that I don't really appreciate. But I don't think it matters because it's got neo-Nazis. Those are always the bad guys. That's an easy bad guy. And so it's easy to connect with it simply on that level. And so it does work. I don't want it to sound like I'm negative about the movie at all. I'm not. I have a deep affection for some of the movies we're about to talk about. So Frontiers is the undergraduate level one because it's my least favorite of the group, but it's by no means a bad movie and by no means a movie I dislike. It's quite good. Not an easy watch. Again, really, really violent, really, really upsetting. And so trigger warning for it, and frankly, trigger warning for everything that we're going to talk about in this video. But it's intense. It's got a reputation for a reason. And I think that it's warranted. So be aware before you go diving into Frontiers about what you're going to get. It might be interesting to note that Frontiers debuted in America, at least, at the After Dark Horror Fest, which was a film festival that I never had the pleasure of actually attending. It went on for a few years around the mid-2010s, I think. I'd have to look it up to be sure, but I'm pretty sure it was around that time. Went on for a few years, and they would have a bunch of movies that come out, and I never got to go, but I did get the DVDs when they would come out. I would buy like the whole set of DVDs of the movies that were highlighted at the film festival so I could check them out. And there was a lot of really good movies in there, most of which are just fun and not really particularly noteworthy or important enough to make the syllabus. Frontiers is one of two After Dark Horror Fest movies that'll make the syllabus. So we'll be talking about another After Dark Horror Fest movie in the future, but I won't spoil, of course, what that is at this stage. Frontiers might be a good way to get into the new French Extremity if you're not really familiar with it. It's maybe something that is both accessible and inaccessible at the same time for the aforementioned political angle. If you're American or not French and don't really know much about French politics, you won't get that part of it, but you'll at least see how that angle or that piece of the new French Extremity works in the movie, while at the same time being able to follow the story enough to understand the basic premise of Muslim Arabs versus neo-Nazis. So for that reason, I think it's a pretty good representative example of the new French Extremity. And when I say a good place to start, again, I just want to stress, only if you're prepared for the extreme violence. It's not for the newbie. It's not for people who are squeamish at all. So if that's the case for you, maybe skip New French Extremity in its entirety. It is called New French Extremity for a reason. So proceed with caution. But if you haven't seen it and you are so inclined, I would love to see you check it out and leave a comment below about what your thoughts are on this, because I kind of have these weird torn feelings about it, as I've kind of described. It's not a favorite of mine, but I do really appreciate it. And I'm wondering if other people have a similar question about connecting with it because of the politics of it, or if they're really really into it. So I'd like to hear your opinions if and when you've seen Frontiers down in the comments below. Our next movie that we're talking about, our graduate level movie, is High Tension. High Tension, known as Haute Tension in France, and yeah, I probably didn't pronounce that correctly. It's also, by the way, called Switchblade Romance in the UK, and I actually like that title quite a bit. It came out in 2003, and it was a polarizing film. If you're not familiar with it, High Tension is the story of two women going on a trip to visit the parents of one of the women, and they're being stalked by a killer. And that's all I can really say about it without totally spoiling it for you. However, in order to talk about this movie, we have to talk a little bit about the fact that there is a twist. And the twist is what makes the movie polarizing. I won't spoil the twist for you here, other than to spoil it, there is actually a twist. But I want to say that the twist makes or breaks the movie for you. And it's going to depend on you personally. Because this movie divides people. There are people that love this movie, and there are people that absolutely loathe this movie. And it's always because of the twist. I personally love the movie. I think the twist is a lot of fun. But I acknowledge that the twist is at best problematic and at worst downright dumb. So I understand why people who hate it would actually feel the way that they do about it. Without giving too much away again, the twist requires us to be fooled. So the movie cheats. It lies to us. It basically tells us some things that aren't actually true. Blatantly lies to the audience. And that usually is a big old problem for me when I see a movie that shows me something that is false and doesn't do a good job of justifying it later on. That is usually a deal breaker for me. It's usually where the movie falls apart. And for a lot of people, I think that's where High Tension fell apart. But if you can let it slide, then this movie becomes a total blast. And it's ridiculous. The plot twist is ridiculous. I'll just tell you that much. But that's what makes the movie kind of fun, at least for me and for fans of the movie, I would imagine. I, for whatever reason, was able to let it slide. Maybe it was because the leads in the movie are really excellent, or maybe it's because the kills in the movie are really excellent. It's an incredibly violent, gory movie, and if you're a gorehound, High Tension's a good one for you. It's got some very creative and gross kills. But because of those things, I was having a good time watching this movie. So when the twist comes, I can look back and go, that doesn't really make a tremendous amount of sense. I don't care. And so I'm just being real with you. High Tension, narratively speaking, doesn't make a lot of sense. I usually really harp on things like that, and I'm giving it a pass here, which I guess makes me a little bit of a hypocrite, but I can't help it. I just enjoy the movie. I think it's extremely well made. It's directed by Alexandre Aja, who I think have talked about before already in the horror movie syllabus, and if not, we definitely will be talking about him. He's a really good director, really good at ratcheting up tension, really good at handling gore, really good at shooting things. His movies tend to look really good. He's great, and he does an awesome job here. The movie has a really good look to it. It's, again, really, really graphic and gruesome. And unlike Frontiers, I find the violence in this movie to be a little bit more on the fun side, like a little bit closer to something like a Dead Alive or one of the splatter films that we would talk about in the splatter video than it is tied to more of the politics and the heavier subject matter of Frontiers. So it's a little bit of a funner watch, but it's also, in my opinion, a little bit more of a more gruesome watch. It may not be the strongest example of the new French Extremity because it's a little lighter on things, kind of like the politics, stuff like that. There is arguably some of that in there, and again, don't want to spoil the movie for you, so I won't go too into that. But it's a little bit more exploitation, a little bit more fun gore than it is about trying to be transgressive political statement making. So it might be more accessible to you on that level. I don't necessarily think it's the better gateway to the new French Extremity because, again, I don't think it necessarily shows all of the tropes of the new French Extremity, but it is a fun movie. If you like violence, if you like gore, if you like a good stalker killer movie, this is a good one. Just be aware the twist will maybe be something you can see coming, but probably not because the movie lies to you, and it if you can roll with it, you'll have a good time. And if not, well, let me know in the comments below if you had a bad time with it. I'd like to hear what you guys' thoughts are on it. The last movie that we're talking about today, our postgraduate level movie, is Martyrs. Martyrs came out in 2008, and it is probably one of my favorite movies that have come out in the last 20 years, and maybe even one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I love this movie. It's an incredible work of art. It's also incredibly, deeply disturbing and upsetting. Martyrs has a reputation that is well deserved for being a rough watch for a number of reasons, which we'll get into in just a few minutes. But I don't want to undersell that to people by me praising it and saying, oh, I love this movie. I love this movie, but I haven't seen this movie too many times. I've seen it maybe 3 times. And because it's not an easy watch at all. The movie, if you're not familiar with it, is the story of a very young girl who is kidnapped and tortured, and she escapes. And then years later, as a young woman, tracks down her tormentors and exacts her revenge. And that's the start of the movie. And from there, it goes into unforeseen territory. It takes a narrative path that is twisty and turny and unexpected and surprising and amazing. And it would be a crime for me to spoil all of that for you. In fact, I think it'd be a challenge for me to spoil all of that for you. Better to just let it unfold naturally. What I've told you about the movie is more than what you need to know going into it. The fact that the movie is set up as a revenge story and then becomes something much deeper and ambitious is a large part of why I like this movie as much as I do. I do really like revenge movies in and of themselves. We have a subgenre for revenge movies, and we'll talk about it much more in depth when we get to that subgenre. But I do have an affection for them since I was little, which, again, I'll go into those stories another time. But Martyrs was already primed to be something that I was going to enjoy simply because of that setup. The fact that it got more philosophical and exploring of faith and violence and fanaticism, and I don't want to get too into because, again, I don't want to spoil things too much, but the fact that it took on a lot of heady existential concepts and tried to say something about them was fantastic. Again, an ambitious movie. I don't know that it 100% achieves its ambitions. I think that that's a matter of debate. I think that if it doesn't actually achieve all those ambitions, it comes pretty darn close. I think there are people out there that would disagree with me. I think there's people that really think this movie is kind of an exploitation piece of garbage. I know there's some people that really dislike it. There are people on YouTube who've talked about who really dislike it. There are people who think that it's really not that disturbing or upsetting, and those people kind of scare me a little bit, if I'm being honest with you, because I find it to be extremely upsetting and disturbing. To give you an idea of the impact of the movie's violence and subject matter, I was watching this movie at home with headphones on. And because my wife does not like horror films, and so sometimes when I'm watching them, I put the headphones on so she doesn't have to hear the movie. And this was definitely one of those movies. So I'm in the living room and I have the headphones on, and she comes in, and I'm just like watching it kind of like this, just kind of like, just kind of cringing almost. It was a particularly rough scene that she happened to walk in on, and she's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, this movie is so incredibly unrelentingly rough. And she said, well, why are you watching it then? I said, because it's brilliant. And it is. I felt like it was brilliant. It moved me in a way that I wasn't expecting to be moved by a horror movie in general, and especially one as incredibly graphic as this. This movie, like all the movies, are really, that we're talking about today, are all really, really graphically violent. There's a lot of tying between sex and violence in these movies. And Martyrs is, of course, no exception to the rule. In fact, it might be one of the best examples of the rule. But I do feel like that in this case it's a lot more visceral than the other movies we've discussed, and partly because one of the major themes of the movie is the infliction of pain, of torture. It really is both a torture movie and a commentary on torture movies at the same time, which could have put it in the torture subgenre that we were going to talk about later. But I really felt like it's something more than that, and of course, it's a big example of the new French Extremity, so it kind of had to go in this subgenre. But it's trying to say something more than that, and by doing so, it makes the violence that much more visceral, that much more impactful. It really hit for me. And if violence bothers you, especially violence against women bothers you, you're gonna have a bad time with this. It's gonna be a rough one for you to get through. But if you can get through it, I feel like the payoff is pretty interesting. I don't think that it answers all of the questions it sets up to answer, and I think that might be by design, or maybe just because they can't really come up with those answers. But this is a movie that left me thinking for a very long time. In fact, I still think about it. The meaning of the things that they present, the themes and the ideas that they present in this movie, really, really powerful. And I love a movie that sticks with me. And this movie has stuck with me for years and years and years. That's why I usually identify it as one of my favorites, because it had such an impact that other movies don't really have usually. And let's be honest, for a horror movie to make me kind of cringe is saying something, because I've watched a lot of them. So uh, if you're looking for that, you're gonna find it here. And hey, if it doesn't hit for you, if this doesn't make you cringe, if you've seen stuff that's worse than this, good for you. But that's scary. They did do a remake of Martyrs, an American remake. One of those remakes that's just like, well, let's make it in English, and it's not great. Um, it does star two actresses, including Troy and Belisario from Pretty Little Liars, and those of you who watch the channel frequently know that I have an affinity for television that's really aimed at like preteen girls, because I don't know, I just have bad taste in TV, I guess. I don't know, but I loved Pretty Little Liars, and Troy Belisario is one of the stars of that, and she's a good actress. And she's good in the movie, and so is the other girl whose name escapes me at the moment. They are good in the movie. The movie, though, because it's made for America, pulls a lot of the punches. It doesn't have anywhere near the same impact, both in terms of violence, the visceral violence, and in terms of the ambition of the message. It's really an incredibly watered down version of Martyrs, and so it's maybe worth a watch just because if you wanted to compare it to the original and kind of see that watering down, then it might be worth checking out. But it's not great. And if you watch the American remake first, you will not understand what the buzz is about, what the big deal is about the movie. And the American remake is subpar, to say the least. So maybe skip the American remake, go with the original. If you're going to check anything out, check out the original. And I'd really like to hear what you think about this, because there are some differing opinions on this. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's polarizing. It's not to the extreme, like a high tension where there's just like people love it and people hate it. But there are people who think it's overrated. There's people who think it's pretentious, and there's people who think it's fabulous, like me. And so I'd like to see where you fall in that camp. Again, the comments to me are a safe space. You're free to disagree with me and share your opinions. I want to hear your opinions. I'm not going to pick on you or tell you you're wrong or troll you for any of your opinions. But I do like to have debates. So if you disagree, if you think Martyrs is overrated or something like that, let's hear about that in the comments, and let's have a discussion about it, because I love it. You guys have been great in the comments lately. We've had some fun discussions, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say about Martyrs, because it is a bit of a notorious film, and sometimes that reputation might get in the way of people's experiences with it. So enough of that. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope you guys will check out Martyrs if you haven't checked it out already. So those are our three picks for the new French Extremity. And as usual, we're going to give you some extra credit movies in case, like me, you wind up really enjoying the new French Extremity. The first movie I'm going to talk about is called Calvaire, which I'm probably mispronouncing as usual. And from what I understand, it translates in English as The Ordeal, which is an apt name for the movie. The movie is about a guy who gets stuck out in the woods and is taken in by a helpful older guy who maybe doesn't have his best interests at heart. As usual, I won't spoil it any more than that. But the movie's intense, and kind of insane. Um, it's hard to describe the insanity of this movie, especially without spoiling some of the surprises in the movie. But it's nuts. It's really insane. It's got your standard violence that you expect from the new French Extremity. It's kind of got these political ideals in there tied in, social ideals, really maybe a better way of putting it. And it's nuts, man. This movie was kind of one of those movies that I'd heard about when I started to get into the new French Extremity. I was starting to look for other examples to watch, and this was one that was kind of I'll call it kind of an underground movie. It's not like it's that hard to find or anything like that, but it was not at all mainstream. It didn't have any kind of the buzz of like a High Tension or Martyrs. But some people who are deep into the new French Extremity or people who are deep into horror would talk about it. And so I was like, oh, I have to see it. It didn't disappoint in terms of the shockingness of it. It's, oh man, it's kind of crazy. I keep coming back to that word. It's kind of crazy. It feels like insanity on film. And I don't mean like insanity like Mandy or like it's like a psychedelic trip. I just mean like it's a dark, bleak, crazy movie. But I like it. I have a high threshold for that kind of insanity and that kind of grotesqueness and stuff. So for me, it was a ride. So for some of you more seasoned horror vets, especially the gore hounds, if you haven't seen Calvaire, check it out and see if it can make you uncomfortable. It made me a little uncomfortable, not to the degree of Martyrs, but it made me uncomfortable. And I'd be curious to see if it makes you uncomfortable too. I really curious to see what the seasoned vets would have to say about Calvaire. If you're a newbie to horror, like I've been saying over and over again, maybe hold off on Calvaire for a little while. But in any event, if you've seen Calvaire, let us know what you think because be curious to see what people's opinions are of this movie. The next movie we're going to talk about is Baise-Moi. And once again, I'm sure I'm butchering the French pronunciation of that movie. It translates into English into something that's frankly a dirty phrase. Let's just say it would be something similar to have sex with me. And the title of the movie is a bit indicative of the subject matter of the movie and the tone of the movie. The movie is grimy and dirty like the title. It's essentially kind of a Thelma and Louise type story. These two women go on a crime spree, but it's like Thelma and Louise, the X-rated version of it, frankly. The sex and violence intertwined in this movie, which is a new French Extremity trope, it's right up at the forefront of the movie. Again, if you couldn't figure it out from the title, it's right there in your face. And it's a rough watch. And I don't know if it's really the most satisfying of movies to watch. I actually really liked this movie, but it's not the kind of movie I think I'd want to revisit because you just feel kind of dirty afterwards watching it. The transgressive trope of the new French Extremity is another thing that's just really kind of right up front for this movie. It really does feel kind of transgressive. It does feel gross to watch. It feels like it's kind of inappropriate to be watching it. But it does have all those themes. It has kind of the socio-political angle to it. It has the sex and the violence intertwined. It has the graphicness of it. It has the kind of bleakness to it that the new French Extremity movies seem to have. So it's a good example of the new French Extremity. Rough watch, kind of an advanced one for people. And if you happen to have seen it, it's not a super mainstream movie. If you happen to have seen it, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments because kind of a controversial pick because it's on the fringe of whether or not it's a horror movie. So like your thoughts on that if you've seen the movie. Do you think it's appropriate to be putting it on the horror movie syllabus even as an extra credit? Or do you think I'm stretching it a little bit? I'd like to hear your thoughts. And the last movie that we're going to talk about today is Irreversible, which probably also should be pronounced with a French accent, but let's be honest, I've been doing a poor job of that all video. So let's just say Irreversible. And Irreversible is another extremely notorious movie that I think is a work of art, but is also an incredibly rough watch. The movie's directed by Gaspar Noé. And he is kind of a polarizing, controversial director. I've only seen a couple of his movies, but I've really liked what I've seen so far. I haven't seen enough to really say whether or not I'd say I'm a fan of his, but I suspect that I might be. I have a few more things to watch of his that are kind of well known to make a decision on that. But from what I've seen, I think he's a really interesting director. He's a little gimmicky maybe, but he's he's a challenging one. He's got some interesting ideas. The gimmicks too can be kind of maybe distracting, but also I think the crux of why a lot of his movies are really interesting. And it's definitely the case for Irreversible. Irreversible is a movie that's told in reverse. It starts at the end of the movie and starts showing the scenes backwards, so that you start at the you end at the start of the movie, which is an interesting take because in a way it gives an incredibly bleak and awful movie a happy ending. That's an interesting twist to the movie. The movie almost made the horror movie syllabus. I really, really wanted to put it on there, but it's really not a horror movie. Like I was talking about Baise-Moi not really maybe being a horror film. Irreversible really is really not thought of much as a horror film, but it is thought of as new French Extremity because it has a lot of the same tropes. The political angle, the sex and violence. The sex and violence is the central concept of the movie. If you're not familiar with it, essentially it's a man and a woman. The woman is sexually assaulted, and the man goes on a revenge journey, but it's told backwards. So the subject matter is very, very touchy. I've said trigger warning for everything. This is the one for sure. Trigger warning. Sexual assault issues. If that's a triggering thing for you, this is definitely not the one for you to watch. It's got one of the most infamous sexual assault scenes maybe ever in a movie, maybe second only to I Spit on Your Grave. It's an incredibly lengthy and graphic, unsettling, unrelenting scene that is incredibly powerful, very, very effective, very, very disturbing, very, very hard to watch. It's Monica Bellucci as the woman, and she's a brilliant actress, Italian actress. She's really, really fabulous in general. She's been in a ton of stuff, and she's incredibly good in this movie. But it's a tough watch, man. It is a really well-made movie, a really interesting way to tell a story, a really powerful, emotionally powerful, emotionally gut-wrenching movie to watch. It'll take you through the ringer. It'll take you for a ride, and I feel like it's an important movie, but I can also understand why you wouldn't want to watch it. The violence is graphic. The sexual violence is graphic. The regular violence also graphic. And it's just so bleak and sad, and yet weirdly ends happy because it ends at the beginning of the movie. So I would give it a high recommend for those of you who have the thick enough skin to actually absorb it and take it on. For those of you that are a little bit more sensitive, no, it's not the one for you. But for those of you who can watch it or have watched it, I would like to hear what your thoughts are on it. I don't think this movie is as polarizing or controversial. I don't think there are people who necessarily dislike it, thinking it's a bad movie. I just think people think that it's a really tough watch. The subject matter is very, very difficult. So I'd like to see if you guys kind of share that thought process with me. Like if you think that it's a very good movie or an important movie, or if you think that, maybe I'm kind of overrating it or making it more important than it needs to be. I'd like to hear that in the comments below because, again, I really like to hear what you guys think. I've been really valuing your opinions, and I hope you guys keep it up. So that's going to do it for the new French Extremity. I feel like I could talk about it for a lot longer because I really do enjoy the movies that are in this subgenre. But let me know if you think of other new French Extremity movies that I didn't touch on here. I usually tell you that a lot of the movies will pop up in other areas of the syllabus. That might be the case here, but off the top of my head, I don't know that it is. Maybe there's one or two, but for the most part, I don't think they permeated into other subgenres, even though they can, as I kind of illustrated when we talked about some of the movies earlier. But let me know if I missed something that you think is really good. Maybe it's something I haven't seen that I need to check out. So I definitely would appreciate the recommendations. And in the comments, you guys have been killing it. You guys have been raising some really interesting points, suggesting some movies, even some older movies that I haven't seen. I love it. Please keep it up, you guys. I really, really appreciate the comments, and I really have been enjoying interacting with you guys in the comments. And if you haven't been leaving comments, get in, man. Get in on the fun. We're starting to build a little community here, sharing our suggestions, sharing our thoughts. People are picking their own suggestions for the subgenres. get in on the action. Have some fun with us because we're having a blast, and I'd like you to join us. So with that, I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to call it a video. Once again, thank you guys all for your attendance. Thank you guys all for your participation in the comments. I really appreciate you all. And with that, it's class dismissed.